So this essay is called Politics in the English Language. Most people who bother with the matter at all admit that the English language is in a bad way, but it is generally assumed that we cannot, by conscious action, do anything about it. Our civilization is decadent, and our language, so the argument runs, must inevitably share in the general collapse. It follows that any struggle against the abuse of language is a sentimental archaism, like preferring candles to electric light or hansom cabs to aeroplanes. Underneath this lies the half-conscious belief that language is a natural growth and not an instrument which we shape for our own purposes. Now, it is clear that the decline of a language must ultimately have political and economic causes. It is not due simply to the bad influence of this or that individual writer, but in effect can become a cause, reinforcing the original cause and producing the same effect in an intensified form, and so on indefinitely. A man may take to drink because he feels himself to be a failure, but then fail all the more completely because he drinks. It is rather the same thing that is happening to the English language. It becomes ugly and inaccurate because our thoughts are foolish, but the slovenliness of our language makes it easier for us to have foolish thoughts. The point is that the process is reversible. Modern English, especially written English, is full of bad habits which spread by imitation and which can be avoided if one is willing to take the necessary trouble. If one gets rid of these habits, one can think more clearly, and to think clearly is a necessary first step towards political regeneration, so that the fight against bad English is not frivolous and is not the exclusive concern of professional writers. I will come back to this presently, and I hope that by that time the meaning of what I have said here will have become clearer. Meanwhile, here are 5 specimens of the English language as it is now habitually written. These 5 passages have been picked out because they are especially bad. I could have quoted far worse if I had chosen, but because they illustrate various of the mental vices from which we now suffer, they are a little below the average, but are fairly representative sample. I number them so that I can refer back to them when necessary. Example 1. I am not, indeed, sure whether it is not true to say that the Milton who once seemed not unlike a 17th century Shelley had not become, out of an experience ever more bitter in each year, more alien, to the founder of that Jesuit sect, which nothing could induce him to tolerate, written by Professor Harold Lasky in his essay, Freedom of Expression. Example number 2. Above all, we cannot play ducks and drakes with a native battery of idioms, which prescribes such egregious collections of vocables as the basic put up with for tolerate or put at a loss for bewilder. Professor Lancelot Hogben, Interglossa. Number 3. On the one side, we have the free personality. By definition, it is not neurotic, for it has neither conflict nor dream. Its desires, such as they are transparent, for they are just what institutional approval keeps in the forefront of consciousness. Another institutional pattern would alter their number and intensity. There is little in them that is natural, irreducible, or culturally dangerous. But, on the other side, the social bond itself is nothing but the mutual reflection of these self-secure integrities. Recall the definition of love. Is not this the very picture of a small academic? Where is there a place in this hall of mirrors for either personality or fraternity? Essay on Psychology in Politics, New York. Example number 4. All the inverted commas best people, from the gentlemen's clubs and all the frantic fascist captains, united in common hatred of socialism and bestial horror of the rising tide of the mass revolutionary movement, have turned to acts of provocation, to foul incendiarism, to medieval legends of poisoned wells, to legalize their own destruction of proletarian organizations and rouse the agitated petty bourgeoisie to chauvinistic fervor on behalf of the fight against the revolutionary way out of the crisis. That's from a communist pamphlet. And number 5. If a new spirit is to be infused into this old country, there is one thorny and contentious reform which must be tackled, and that is the humanization and galvanization of the BBC. Timidity here will bespeak canker and atrophy of the soul. The heart of Britain may lie sound of strong beat, for instance, but the British lion's roar at present is like that of Bottom in Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, as gentle as any suckling dove. A virile New Britain cannot continue indefinitely to be traduced in the eyes, or rather the ears, of the world by the effete languors of Langham Place, brazenly masquerading as standard English. When the voice of Britain is heard at 9 o'clock, better far and infinitely less ludicrous to hear H's honestly dropped than the present priggish, inflated, inhibited, schoolmarmish arch braying of blameless, bashful, mewing maidens. That's a letter on the BBC to the Tribune. Each of these passages has its faults, but quite apart from avoidable ugliness, two qualities are common to all of them. The first is staleness of imagery. The other is lack of precision. The writer either has a meaning and cannot express it, or he inadvertently says something else, or he is almost indifferent as to whether his words mean anything or not. This mixture of vagueness and sheer incompetence is the most marked characteristic of modern English prose, and especially of any kind of political writing. As soon as certain topics are raised, the concrete melts into the abstract, and no one seems to think of turns of speech that are not hackneyed. Prose consists less and less of words chosen for the sake of their meaning, and more of phrases, tacked together, like the sections of a prefabricated henhouse. I list below, with notes and examples, various of the tricks by means of which the work of prose construction is habitually dodged. Dying metaphors. A newly invented metaphor assists thought by evoking a visual image, while on the other hand, a metaphor which is technically dead, i.e., iron resolution, has in effect reverted to being an ordinary word, and can generally be used without loss of vividness. But in between these two classes there is a huge dump of worn-out metaphors which have lost all evocative power and are merely used because they save people the trouble of inventing phrases for themselves. Examples are: ring the changes on, take up the cudgels for, toe the line, ride roughshod over, stand shoulder to shoulder with, play into the hands of, an axe to grind, grist to the mill, fishing in troubled waters, on the order of the day, Achilles' heel, swan song, hotbed. Many of these are used without knowledge of their meaning. What is a rift, for instance? And incompatible metaphors are frequently mixed, a sure sign that the writer is not interested in what he is saying. Some metaphors now current have been twisted out of their original meaning, without those who use them even being aware of the fact. For example, toe the line is sometimes written as toe, T-O-W, the line. Another example is the hammer and the anvil, now always used with the implication that the anvil gets the worst of it. In real life, it is always the anvil that breaks the hammer, never the other way round. A writer who stopped to think about what he was saying would be aware of this and would avoid perverting the original phrase. Operators, or verbal false limbs, these save the trouble of picking out appropriate verbs and nouns, and at the same time pad each sentence with extra syllables which give it an appearance of symmetry. Characteristic phrases are: render inoperative, militate against, prove unacceptable, make contact with, be subjected to, give rise to, give grounds for, have the effect of, play a leading part, rule in, make itself felt, take effect, exhibit a tendency, serve the purpose of, etc., etc. The keynote is the elimination of simple verbs. Instead of being a single word such as break, stop, spoil, mend, kill, a verb becomes a phrase made up of a noun or adjective tacked on to some general purpose verb, as prove, serve, form, play, render. In addition, the passive voice is, wherever possible, used in preference to the active, and noun constructions are used instead of gerunds, by example of instead of, by examination of, instead of, by examining. The range of verbs is further cut down by means of the I's and D formations, and banal statements are given an appearance of profundity by means of the not-un formation. Simple conjunctions and prepositions are replaced by phrases as with respect to, having regard to, the fact that, by dint of, in view of, in the interests of, on the hypotheses that, and the end of sentences are saved from anticlimax by such resounding commonplaces as greatly to be desired, cannot be left out of account, a development to be expected in the near future, deserving of serious consideration, brought to a satisfactory conclusion, and so on and so forth. Pretentious diction. Words like phenomenon, element, individual as noun, objective, categorical, effective, virtual, basis, primary, promote, constitute, exhibit, exploit, utilize, eliminate, liquidate are used to dress up simple statements and give an air of scientific impartiality to biased judgments. Adjectives like epoch-making, epic, historic, unforgettable, triumphant, age-old, inevitable, inexorable, veritable are used to dignify the sordid processes of international politics, while writing the aims of glorifying war usually take on an archaic colour, its characteristic words being realm, throne, chariot, mailed fist, trident, sword, shield, buckler, banner, jackboot, clarion. Foreign words and expressions such as cul-de-sac, ancien régime, deus ex machina, mutatis mutandis, status quo, Gleichschaltung, it's German, Gleichschaltung, Schaum, whatever noise those Jerrys make, no offense, Germans. Except for the useful abbreviations i.e., e.g., and etc., there is no real need for any of the hundreds of foreign phrases now current in English. Bad writers, and especially scientific, political, and sociological writers, are nearly always haunted by the notion that Latin or Greek words are grander than Saxon ones, and unnecessary words like expedite, ameliorate, predict, extraneous, deracinated, clandestine, subaqueous, and hundreds of others constantly gain ground from their Anglo-Saxon opposite numbers. The jargon peculiar to Marxist writing, hyena, hangman, cannibal, petty bourgeois, these gentry, lackey, flunky, mad dog, white guard, etc., consists largely of words and phrases translated from either Russian, German, or French, but the normal way of coining a new word is to use a Latin or Greek root with the appropriate affix, where necessary, the IEZ formation. It is often easier to make up words of this kind, deregionalize, impermissible, extramartial, non-fragmentary, and so forth, than to think up the English words that will cover one's meaning. The result, in general, is an increase in slovenliness and vagueness. Note 1. An interesting illustration of this is the way in which the English flower names, which are in use till very recently, are being ousted by Greek ones. Snapdragon becoming antirhinum. Forget-me-not becoming myosotis, etc. It is hard to see any practical reason for this change of fashion. It is probably due to an instinctive turning away from the more homely word and a vague feeling that the Greek word is scientific. Meaningless words. In certain kinds of writing, particularly in art criticism and literary criticism, it is normal to come across long passages which are almost completely lacking in meaning. Note below. Words like romantic, plastic, values, human, dead, sentiment, natural, vitality, as used in art criticism, are strictly meaningless, in the sense that they not only do not point to any discoverable object, but are hardly even expected to do so by the reader. When one critic writes, "The outstanding feature of Mr. X's work is its living quality," while another writes, "The immediately striking thing about Mr. X's work is its peculiar deadness," the reader accepts this as a simple difference of opinion. If words like black and white were involved, instead of the jargon words dead and living, we would see at once that language was being used in an improper way. Many political words are similarly abused. The word fascism has now no meaning, except insofar as it signifies something not desirable. The words democracy, socialism, freedom, patriotic, realistic, justice have each of them several different meanings, which cannot be reconciled with one another. In the case of a word like democracy, not only is there no agreed definition, but the attempt to make one is resisted from all sides. It is almost universally felt that when we call a country democratic, we are praising it. Consequently, the defenders of every kind of regime claim that it is a democracy, and fear that they might have to stop using the word if it were tied down to any one meaning. Words of this kind are often used in a consciously dishonest way. That is, the person who uses them has his own private definition, but allows his hearer to think he means something quite different. Statements like, Marshal Pétain was a true patriot, the Soviet press is the freest in the world, the Catholic Church is opposed to persecution, are almost always made with an intent to deceive. Other words, used in variable meanings, in most cases more or less dishonestly, are class, totalitarian, science, progressive, reactionary bourgeois, equality. Note, example, comfort Catholicity of perception and image, strangely Whitmanesque in range, almost the exact opposite in aesthetic compulsion, continues to evoke that trembling, atmospheric, accumulative hinting at a cruel and inexorable serene timelessness. Ray Gardner scores by aiming at simple bullseyes with precision, only they are not so simple, and through this contented sadness runs more than the surface bittersweet of resignation. Poetry Quarterly, an author's footnote.